So in today's episode, I'd like to discuss just something I was reflecting on a few weeks ago, and I came up with this phrase to help me to deepen my reflection, as well as something kind of to remember what I was thinking about, what I was pondering. And the phrase goes something like this: the challenge is not so much how we live with the end, but how we live with the continuity. So I don't know about you, but I find myself often referencing this human life, like my experience as Scott, etc., in relation to an end. This isn't necessarily like obvious a lot of the time, but I do notice it's kind of just underneath the surface, this question, this inevitability that I'll have to leave this body at some point, whether that's sooner or later, I don't know, but at some point I will. I'm pretty sure you will too. Sorry for the bad news. And of course, in Buddhist practice, we reflect on this a lot, not to sort of be morbid or to be a bummer all the time, but often there's this sense that when we reflect on the inevitability of death, that we can live, right? That we can live life more well, with more wisdom and compassion. So that is definitely the sentiment I'm coming here with today. So if you have difficulty listening to, reflecting on, hearing about death, of course you're welcome. You can pause or turn this off right now. But I just want to invite you into a very open conversation about it, a light conversation with, no pun intended, some light at the end of the tunnel. A lot of us come to death from a lot of unconscious habits and patterns around, come to thinking about it, but we come to either ignoring it and rejecting it or thinking about it from time to time with a lot of unconscious patterns, especially unconscious patterns I noticed in the modern West, of kind of unconscious habits of nihilism and a sense that sort of that's it, that it's lights out, done, right? Now, again, I'm not here to convince you of any belief or religious belief. Obviously, just to be totally transparent, Buddhism does not believe this is our first rodeo, nor will it be our last. They don't believe mind or consciousness and body are the same thing. Though, of course, they're interacting right now. It's sort of like the body is hosting the consciousness. But when the body dies, Buddhism does believe that consciousness, if we continue in samsara, we'll move on to another rebirth based on cause and effect. Or if we are able to become a Buddha, hopefully an enlightened being, we are free at that point. But it doesn't mean consciousness stops. It just continues as a Buddha. But again, those are really deep end topics. That is not the point of this episode. But I just wanted to mention them, right? And be just totally transparent, right? Obviously, I have some bias where I don't believe we just end. And I also think that's kind of, I think it is a little bit of a harmful position. But I understand it, and I understand why people believe that, and maybe even you believe that, and it's totally fine, right? No big deal. I'm not here to argue that. But I was reflecting on this and thinking, okay, so much of my decisions in life, a lot of how I think about my spiritual path, progress on that, whatever, it's in relation to this sort of end, this inevitability. And I think some of that can be positive, right? But what it got me reflecting on is often I'm not thinking about the continuity. And so I'll say a little bit on what I mean by this. So obviously, for some of you who are aware of Buddhist philosophy, it does propose that in part of the relative world is that there is this underlying continuity of cause and effect called karma. I'm not going to do a super deep dive on karma here. It's one of those sticking points I noticed for Western meditators and even Western Buddhists. I have my theories why it becomes a sticking point, but I'm not here to challenge that necessarily today. But I do want to point out what karma is and isn't, because I've noticed there's a lot of let's just call them like a little bit twisted ideas on what karma is. And some of those come from pop culture or perhaps other Indic traditions and what they believe karma is. But I just wanted to say a little bit about how we think of karma from the Mahayana Buddhist perspective, because it'll help our conversation here. So karma is a relative truth. It's not an absolute truth in Mahayana Buddhism. What that means is it's actually not true. And ultimately, it's not real. But anyways, we're not going to go there. But anyways, it functions just like a tree functions. And, if you plant a certain, seed of a cedar tree, you're going to get that kind of tree and those kinds of leaves and branches, etc. Same with, different kinds of food we eat. If you, plant an apple tree, you're not going to get a chili plant, right? You're going to get an apple tree. So basically we just call this that an effect it needs to be in accordance with the cause. And we can just see that in the relative world. This is just part of relative phenomena. Relative just means what's dependent on cause and effect. And relative also means impermanent. But basically, we don't have to be religious. We don't have to be a great philosopher to discover this. It's just, we call it like the farmer logic, right? You plant this kind of seed, you're going to get this kind of plant or tree. And so we call that cause and effect, right? That the cause has a certain relationship to the effect and vice versa. And that's just happening in the world in general. We can see that also with our thoughts and emotions. Like if we feed or encourage a certain thought process of, let's say, aggression, it's more likely we're going to experience anger, or it's more likely we're going to experience angry thoughts, right? So we're just encouraging that cause and effect process. Or how I'm putting it here is continuity, right? It's another way to think of continuity. So that's what we would call sort of more gross levels of cause and effect. Just obvious, we all can see those, and even if we can't see it, we can infer it, right? Like so. Gravity would be something kind of more hidden or subtle, where we can't see gravity. Like you can't say, oh, that's gravity, but you can see the results of gravity, right? You toss a rock off of a roof, you're going to see gravity happening, but you can't see the gravity, you see the results of gravity, right? So that we would call like hidden cause and effect. Now we get in the territory of karma, which is extremely hidden phenomena or extremely hidden cause and effect. And what this means is like we need to infer it. It's not something we can perceive with our senses, though people in very advanced stages of realization in Buddhism supposedly can see karma directly. But anyways, the point here is for most of us, it's a phenomena, it's relative, but it's extremely hidden, right? So I understand why people have difficulty with it. But another way to think of karma is, I'm just mentioning it, is continuity, right? So karma, it represents also this continuity of one, a cause and action of body, speech, and mind, causes an effect, which then has another effect, et cetera, et cetera. And it's just continuity. It's endless, right? So really, this is what we're referring to with karma. And just for a little bit of a deeper dive on it, Buddhism doesn't view karma as a good thing necessarily. It's sort of something that's happening, just like we could see sort of there's things in our life and in the world that we can't avoid. We're in that, we're swimming in that pool. So the point of the Buddha teaching on karma was first to let us know, hey, there's this extremely hidden thing happening at the level of mind, through our actions of body and speech, etc. And you will become, in the future, what you are acting from now. You're planting the seeds for future results. So the first teaching on that is kind of just more or less like a little bit of a warning, like just like someone say, hey, don't put your hand on a hot stove. But because it comes in the package of a religion and it comes in as an extremely hidden phenomenon that we can't necessarily prove through our senses, I totally understand how that's difficult to accept. But I just want to say the intention of why it's taught is a compassionate one. It's saying, hey, like try to avoid these things that you're going to actually have to experience the results of that you're not going to enjoy, you're not going to like. They're going to be harmful for you and others. So that's kind of the principle, right? That's the basis. But that's not where it stops. Then it says karma is actually part of the structure of our samsaric bind. So the purpose of the Buddhist path, you could say, is to ultimately release ourselves and others from this samsaric framework. We could say this sort of continuity that is stuck in a loop, right? That's what samsara is, right? It usually gets represented by some sort of a circling process. And so it's a loop that's not thought of as a positive thing. And so the larger purpose of the Buddhist path is to remedy that, is to sort of see that as a type of dream loop we're in. And the Buddhist path and the meditation on the Buddhist path is there to cut that loop, right? And when we cut that loop, we end up in the greater continuity of Buddhahood, right? Which is a little bit of a different kind of continuity, but anyways, we'll use that. We'll just keep with the same term. So either way, now that we kind of established a base together, and I apologize if that's a little too like in the weeds, but establishing a base is just what I think is necessary for this kind of conversation. Not that you have to believe what I'm saying, just so we can understand each other a little bit better. And so from there, I think that's what prompted me in this sense of like, okay, why am I obsessed with this end? Why am I not obsessed with the continuity? Both as a samsaric being where, unless I miraculously attain enlightenment this life or the end of this life, I'll have to experience another samsaric form, and there'll be the continuity, which is affected by what I do now. So it really brought sobriety that wasn't comfortable. I'll just be honest about that. Whenever I reflect on that, it's not comfortable because I do not like everything that I do. I'm not like a perfect person, and there are mistakes that I make that I wish I didn't. And so there's that uncomfortable truth of, okay, if I'm accepting this kind of underlying cause and effect, this extremely hidden cause and effect, how am I taking responsibility for that continuity? Right. So that's kind of one sobering reminder. But the other one is kind of, I would say, a little bit more in the positive direction where, what Buddhism also says is, Mahayana Buddhism, is that we have this continuity of Buddha nature alongside that. And Buddha nature is our awake nature, right? So some people might think Buddhism is saying we have to like exit this sort of, I don't know how you say it, this sort of, when we're splitting it into samsara and nirvana or samsara and enlightenment, and it's samsara and enlightenment, that we have to sort of exit this thing and attain this godlike, heaven-like state of being an enlightened being or awake being or a Buddha. It's not really quite what it's saying. And so either way, there's a continuity, but there's the continuity of our awake state or the continuity of this sort of extremely entrenched, stagnant, stuck state where we experience ourselves more or less in a state of dissatisfaction or not peace, or, that peace comes and goes, right? Which is how it is for a lot of us. So either way, I think we need to reflect on continuity. And so what we want to also feed is, of course, the recognition of sort of what are we creating? Essentially, that's what this conversation on continuity from a samsaric perspective is asking us to reflect on. Who are we becoming? What are we creating for our future? Which I think is important. A lot of us do that already anyways. I mean, everyone's saving for retirement. What is that, right? It's some kind of recognition of continuity. Meaning, like, are you the same self that's experiencing the retirement? Sort of. I don't know. It's debatable. But anyways, so that's one kind of continuity. And of course, we got to take care of that. But this other continuity of our awake state, which we call our Buddha nature, we also feed. And we generally feed that. We bring attention to that. We encourage that through the Buddhist path, through study, understanding, reflection, meditation, right? Through a series of practices, and we grow our connection to our relationship to that, which is also a part of continuity. But it's this continuity free from the loop of the continuity of samsara. So I think that's about it. I just wanted to share some thoughts on what I was reflecting on. I'm not sure if this is useful at all for you. Maybe not, but I hope so. At the very least, I think being obsessed with an end can be quite limiting. And again, maybe just in our last few minutes here, I'll bring it down to something more practical. Yeah, let's talk about retirement for a moment. Sometimes I can get really obsessed with sort of some number for retirement. Not that I'm not sure I will ever retire from from being a meditation teacher. I'm not sure about that yet. But either way, there's this sense of, goal and then achievement. But actually, there was a whole process along with that. There was a whole path that we became another person, better or worse, whatever. And so there's often this sort of false belief or false sense of good of these goal settings, and then there's sort of some sense of a permanence there. But I don't know, from the little I've experienced of sort of goal setting and then actually getting to those goals, I've noticed it doesn't usually work out that way, if at all. So I think there's some practical things here for us too, of what if we let go of endings to a certain degree? I mean, it's fine to have goals. It's fine to set those. Nothing wrong with that. Actually, I think they're very useful. But what if it's not a goal? It's just sort of like, okay, there's this path to this thing, and it's a learning process. And then once we get there, there's a whole other learning process into what we're moving into next, whether that's financial education and goals, or, spiritual and personal growth goals, family goals, whatever that is. I think continuity still can play a really big part in a very practical way in how we relate to life, how we relate to the continuity of life. And again, kind of going back to this initial thing, I think thinking about like, who do we want to be? And I don't mean beyond, usually that's like, when I was growing up, who do you want to be? It was more like, what job do you want to have? No, I mean, like, what do we want to be? Do we want to be a kinder person? Do we want to, put ourselves in a situation where potentially there's a little more ease in our life in a certain way? Do we want to work with our emotions, our difficult, emotions now, so we have a little bit more understanding and compassion with them later on? So I think these are all really important when it comes to continuity. I'm reflecting on this a lot these days. So just want to end on a little bit of a practical note. So as always, please let me know how this is landing for you. If you want to comment on YouTube, I really appreciate that. If you're listening to the podcast, you can also just go to my website, scotttusa.com, and send me a note. Okay, thanks so much.